All of us who are dealing with biblical studies have an enormous debt to Bishop Tom Wright for the extraordinary quantity of investigation that he's carried out. I want to tackle what I think is one of the most interesting issues of all, and that is the definition of God. And from his book, Jesus and the Victory of God, I'm reading a section here about the Great Commandment and the Good Samaritan. Let me deal with the Great Commandment. A good deal of Jesus' challenge and summons, I'm quoting now from Jesus and the Victory of God. A good deal of Jesus' challenge and summons, both positively and negatively, is focused in the brief discussion about which commandment is the greatest, a question with which rabbis of Jesus' day, as of subsequent generations, would have been quite familiar. Yes, that's absolutely true. Rabbis loved to summarize the core of faith, the core of belief. A very reasonable way, by the way, of teaching effectively is to have a central core concept around which everything is built. Then Bishop Wright says, the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, which is a command, listen, Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. The Shema, which Tom Wright calls the prayer which begins with these lines, was as central to Judaism then as it is now. And the coupling of it with the command to love one's neighbor as oneself was not unknown either. I wonder if we realize what Tom Wright is saying here. The creed and prayer, as we can also call it, which Jesus here cites and affirms in agreement with a friendly Jew, is the heart and core of what is known as the Jewish creed. But my question is, if it's the Jewish creed and Jesus affirms it, it should automatically be the Christian creed. One is nervous here about a frightening departure on the part of Christians from the teachings of Jesus. Surely here Tom Wright is helping us to see and to remind us that the creed which Jesus agreed and affirmed with the friendly Jew is the creed that we Christians should be listening to. So are we reciting the Shema? Do we mean in our definition of God what Jesus meant? That's the all-important question. Now, in another book of Tom Wright's, which is called The New Testament and the People of God, we have the following introduction again. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. The Shema, says Bishop Wright, the most famous Jewish prayer, which goes back to the days of Deuteronomy at least, was burned into the consciousness of Judaism in the first century. Let me add that it still is to this day amongst those who are taking their Judaism seriously. It was not the result, says Bishop Wright, of speculative metaphysical inquiry. Absolutely, it was not. It was meant to be a very plain, easy concept, a very plain, easy concept, readily available, readily accessible by the ordinary reader. And it was also supposed to be, Bishop Wright says, the battle cry of the nation that believed its God to be the only God, supreme in heaven and earth. And he quotes from the Psalms, great is Yahweh, greatly to be praised. He is to be revered above all gods, for all the gods of the peoples are idols, but Yahweh made the universe, made the heavens. Say among the nations, Yahweh is king. This is a fighting doctrine, a cause of celebration for the beleaguered little nation that went on singing these psalms and praying the Shema through thick and thin. The nations must know that Israel's God is the true and only God, and that the beings they mistakenly worship are non-gods, mere human inventions. This already gives us the flavor of Jewish monotheism. In order to understand it more fully, we can examine different forms of that concept, but listen carefully. This is the Jewish monotheistic idea founded in the Shema. But Jesus, I want to stress, repeats it and affirms it. There's not the slightest hint in the mind of Jesus that we've moved to a different definition of God from the one proclaimed in Israel for thousands of years. Now, that Shema is a unitary monotheistic statement. It certainly is not a Trinitarian monotheism. We've gotten in a bad habit of saying, oh yes, we all agree that God is one. But what do you mean by one? Bishop Wright is helpful here. He talks about a Jewish monotheistic view found in the Shema, but found on the lips of Jesus, please note. And so the issue arises, if you're intent on obeying Jesus, and surely the New Testament says very little else but that we are to obey our Rabbi Jesus and follow him in every way, if you really believe that, then are you not going to protest at any creed which is other than the unitary monotheistic creed of Jesus, supporting the Shema, supporting his wonderful Jewish heritage from the Old Testament? And you do know that the Jews went into exile if they got this wrong. God was not pleased with any deviation from the unitary Jewish so-called monotheistic creed of Israel. Jesus was no less excited about that than the God whom he served. I remind you that Jesus was the servant of God. He was speaking the very words of God, claiming to be a unique shaliach, or agent of the one God. And the words he spoke were the very words coming from his mentor, supervisor, sponsor, who was the God of Israel, the one God of Israel. Listen, Israel, Jesus says to us all. The Lord our God is one Lord, one single Yahweh. Or we may translate, the Lord our God, he is one. The Lord is one. One person, Is. That's very easy in Greek. Abraham was one person. Abraham was Is, one person. There's nothing here to argue about. It is self-evidently true that the creed of Jesus was not Trinitarian. That's a much later development. So I think what we need to be thinking very seriously about is our own devotional life, our own creedal system. Are we in fact playing fair with the words of Jesus at the most crucial level of defining who God is? My suggestion here, backed by Tom Wright's excellent statements, is that Jesus was a monotheistic Jewish person. And by monotheism in that Jewish context, we don't mean the Trinity. This is the thought I think we need to really unravel and get this conversation going in public, because it has enormous ramifications for the whole of the Christian theology as we know it, and for our present interaction with Muslims and Jews also.